The Pacific Ocean, July 1945. It is a canvas of black silk under a sky so clear it looked painted with a million diamonds. The USS Indianapolis, a heavy cruiser known affectionately as the Indy, sliced through the water, a ghost in the dark. She carried a secret so vast, so weighty, that it would change the course of human history, the components of the atomic bomb. Her mission, the ultimate success, was complete. She had delivered her deadly cargo. Now she was alone, steaming toward the Leyte Gulf for a routine rendezvous, her crew thinking only of the war's end. Below deck, in the stifling heat of the engine room, stood Lieutenant Commander Elias Vance. 35 years old, he was a Navy lifer, a man whose spine was straighter than the mast. He had seen the Indy through a dozen battles, and she had always brought him home. He checked the gauge, the red needle sitting perfectly steady. "She's humming tonight, Max," he murmured. Seaman First Class Peter Maxwell, a gangly 19-year-old from Ohio, wiped sweat from his brow with a greasy rag. "Too quiet, Commander. Makes me nervous, like the ocean's holding its breath." Vance smiled, a rare, tired curve of his lips. "It's the lull before the victory party, son. The war's almost over. You'll be home before the leaves change." Maxwell nodded, but his eyes held a flicker of doubt. He was young, but he'd learned fast what the ocean kept hidden. He'd learned to dread the stillness. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the steady pulse of the engines. Not the thrum of the screws, but a sharp, rhythmic hiss in the water. It was the sound of something moving under the surface, fast and silent. Vance's smile vanished. His hand flew to the alarm lever. He didn't have time to pull it. The first torpedo struck at 12:14 a.m., July 30, 1945. It hit forward, tearing a hole wide enough to swallow a truck, igniting the aviation fuel and powder magazines stored there. A colossal roar ripped through the ship, followed by a shock wave that threw Vance against a bulkhead like a rag doll. Before the smoke could even clear, the second one struck directly beneath the bridge, rupturing fuel tanks in the double bottom. The deck shuddered, then heaved. The lights went out, plunging the engine room into a darkness thick with smoke and the choking smell of burning oil and pulverized metal. "Damage report." Vance roared, fighting the sudden, impossible angle of the deck. The ship was already tilting, a staggering 90-degree list beginning in seconds. The Indy was mortally wounded. Maxwell clung to a ladder, his face pale but his eyes wide and focused. "We're going over, Commander. We have to abandon ship." The Indy was sinking with impossible speed. From the moment the first torpedo struck, she had only 12 minutes to live. Vance knew the ship's death rattle when he heard it. The groaning metal, the rush of water, it was a symphony of finality. He fought his way through the listing passageway, the last order on his mind. "Get out. Get to the side. Life vest. Abandon ship." 883 men survived the initial explosions and managed to spill out onto the deck or be thrown into the water. Vance and Maxwell found themselves among a surging, panicked mass at the starboard rail. No alarms had sounded, no clear orders had been given shipwide, and the suddenness of the sinking meant few lifeboats or rafts were properly launched. Vance grabbed Maxwell's shoulder. "Life vest, Max. Now." Maxwell fumbled with his inflatable belt, the adrenaline making his hands clumsy. The ship was almost on its side, the main deck becoming a terrifying vertical slide. The bow was already submerged and the fantail rose, pointing like a monument of steel to the sky. A searing, frantic sound, the final expulsion of air from the ship's lungs, and then she was gone. The USS Indianapolis, the sleek, proud heavy cruiser, slipped beneath the waves, taking 300 men with her. Vance and Maxwell were sucked under by the turbulence. The water was warm, but the force was terrifying, dragging them into a pitch-black abyss. When Vance fought his way back to the surface, he was retching, covered head to toe in thick black fuel oil. The oil was everywhere, coating the water, blinding, stinging, and offering a brief, macabre sense of warmth. The sound of hundreds of men screaming was the new silence. Vance found Maxwell clinging to a bobbing crate. "Max, over here." They swam toward the sounds of others. They found a knot of men, maybe 100 strong, struggling to stay together in the oily darkness. Among them was Chief Petty Officer Thomas Riggs, a huge man known for his booming laugh and iron resolve. Tonight his voice was a ragged whisper. "Commander Vance. We're together." But no signal. The radio room was gone. Vance nodded grimly. He knew what that meant. No SOS. They were a secret, floating in the dark. No one in the world knew they were gone. The Navy expected the Indy to arrive at Leyte in a few days. The Navy had failed to institute the proper system to track its arrival. The silence from the outside world would become their greatest killer. "Listen up," Vance shouted, his voice cracking from the oil. "We form groups. No one floats alone. Hold hands, link arms. We conserve energy. We will be found. The war is too close to over for them not to find us." His words, though a lie he told himself as much as them, stopped the collective panic. They held on. But then the other silence descended. The stillness of the water, broken only by the whimpers of the wounded and the lap of the waves. And then the bumping began. The first night was a brutal lesson in exposure. The oil slick helped prevent hypothermia, but it made their eyes burn and their throats choke. The men were nauseous, shivering despite the tropical water. But the real fear came from below. In the dark, men began to scream. Not the screams of panic, but of sudden, horrifying agony. "Something bit me. God, my leg. It got my leg." A man named Davy, who had been floating right next to Riggs, suddenly vanished. One thrash, a strangled gurgle, and the space where he was had nothing but a spreading stain in the oil. Chief Petty Officer Riggs gasped, his face slick with oil and terror. What was that? What took him? Vance, fighting his own terror, tried to maintain order. "Stay still. Minimal movement. It's the wreckage drawing them. They're feeding on the dead." But they weren't just feeding on the dead anymore. They were in the territory of the oceanic whitetip shark, a relentless predator drawn from the deep by the sound, scent, and pressure changes of the chaos. The lateral line, a series of receptors along a shark's body, detects changes in pressure and movement from a distance. Every thrash, every panic, every wound was a dinner bell. Peter Maxwell, gripping Vance's arm, whispered, "Commander, I saw one. It's Finn. Big as a man's torso." Vance looked at the boy, his young face contorted with shock. "We stay close, Max. We organize a shark watch. 2 men at a time looking out. We kick, we splash, we fight them off when they get close. But only when they get close. We save our strength." He had given them a job, a purpose. He had bought them an hour of sanity. But the night was endless. They heard the sounds of the attacks, the sudden, piercing shriek of a man, followed by a terrifying, absolute silence. It was a lottery of death. Day one dawned, bringing not hope, but a new, blazing torment. The sun, a brutal enemy, baked them. The water, once their only salvation, became a torturer. Dehydration set in with terrifying speed. Their lips were cracked, their tongues swollen. Chief Petty Officer Riggs, the strong one, was starting to break. He kept swallowing seawater, then throwing it up in oil-stained spasms. "Riggs, stop it," Vance yelled. "You know better. Salt water will kill you faster than the sharks." Riggs stared at him, his eyes bloodshot, already showing the first signs of delusion. "The sun is a Japanese flag, Vance. They're watching us. They know." "No one knows, Chief," Vance said, his voice softer but steel hard underneath. "We are keeping our wits. We wait for the flyover. They have to be looking for us." But day one ended. No plane. Just the waves, the oil, and the constant, silent presence of the predators circling beneath. Day two brought the hallucinations. This was the true psychological battle, the one the sharks couldn't win but the body could lose. Men began to see things. They saw the stern of the Indianapolis floating just beneath the surface, offering fresh water and milk. Men swam to the mirage, drank the sea, and drowned quickly. They saw Japanese soldiers swimming toward them, and some men, driven mad by thirst and delusion, would strike out at their own shipmates, fighting until they were exhausted, making them easy prey for the real enemy below. A one-man swam away, shouting that he could see the coast of California. He was gone within the hour. Vance watched his command disintegrate. He felt the pull of the mirages himself. A vision of a water faucet dripping cold, clear water just a few feet away. He fought it by focusing on Peter Maxwell. The young man was shivering, whispering to himself. "Max, what are you doing?" "Talking to my girl," Maxwell rasped, his eyes clear for the moment. "Eliza. I promised her a house with a porch. I can't die here. Not before the porch." Vance grabbed his shoulder, the pain of the grip a momentary anchor for them both. "Then focus on the porch, Max. Don't look at the water. Don't look at the sky. Look at the porch. It has to be painted blue, right?" Maxwell managed a dry, choked laugh. "No, sir. White. With a rose bush." "White," Vance repeated, forcing the word through his own parched throat. "Keep describing the white porch, Max. Don't let the water change the color." Day 3 was the worst. The sharks were bolder now. They no longer waited for the thrashing. They would come straight up like lightning and take a man down. The group had dwindled from nearly 100 to about 40. The dead men's life vests were repurposed for the living, a grim inheritance. Chief Petty Officer Riggs had been silent for hours, floating on his back, his eyes staring blankly at the sky. He had succumbed to the saltwater madness. Then he suddenly sat up, his face a horrifying mask of triumph. "I found it. I found the whole ship. It's right here," Riggs shouted, pointing a skeletal finger at a patch of perfectly normal oil-covered water. "The galley's open. Fresh potatoes and water. Come on boys, we're saved." Several men, barely clinging to consciousness, started to paddle toward his delusion. Vance knew this was the moment. The breaking point. He had to sacrifice his last ounce of strength to save the few remaining souls. "Riggs? No!" Vance screamed, his voice raw. But Riggs didn't hear him. He was already swimming downward, pulling off his vest. He thought he was descending a ladder into the safety of a non-existent ship. Vance watched, heartbroken, as his friend vanished. Riggs had succumbed to one of the most common and sorrowful deaths of the ordeal. It was just after Riggs went under that Peter Maxwell saw the movement. Not a shark fin, he'd seen too many of those, but a faint, metallic glint in the water a few feet away. "Commander, look." Maxwell pointed with a trembling hand. It was a small, sealed ration tin that had floated free from the wreckage, bobbing just beneath the surface. Vance, fighting the exhaustion that screamed at him to give up, dragged himself to it. His fingernails tore as he scraped away the oil. He pulled it up. It was heavy. Inside was a packet of crackers and a small tin of Spam. It was practically nothing, a few hundred calories for 20 starving men, but it was everything. It was real. It was proof that the delirium was a lie. Vance tore the small packet of crackers into microscopic pieces, distributing them to the men who were still rational. "This is real," he choked out, forcing a tiny, stale cracker into Maxwell's mouth. "Don't swim to the ghosts. This is the only reality we get. We hold out until tomorrow." That single cracker, a taste of salt and flour, became their anchor. Day 4 was hell without end. The attacks continued, men died of thirst and exhaustion, but a small core, anchored by Vance's iron will and Maxwell's faint memory of a white porch, held on. The surviving 316 men were now scattered over a massive, unpatrolled area of ocean. Then, at 11 a.m. on August 2, 1945, a sound that was not the lapping of waves or the screaming of a dying shipmate pierced the sky. It was the steady, welcome drone of an airplane engine. Lieutenant Wilbur Gwynn, flying a routine patrol in a PV-1 Ventura, was looking for Japanese subs. He was not looking for survivors. It was only by chance that he saw the oil slick and the scattered dots that looked like nothing more than debris. Maxwell, barely conscious, felt the change in the air pressure, heard the faint thump-thump-thump of the propeller. "Commander, plane," he whispered, lifting a hand that felt like lead. Vance, who had been praying, weeping, and shouting into the waves for 4 full days, could only watch, tears streaming through the oil on his face. The plane dipped its wing, confirming the unthinkable. They had been seen. Gwynn immediately radioed for help, dropping a life raft and a transmitter. Later that evening, a PBY flying boat, piloted by Lieutenant Commander Adrian Marks, arrived. Defying standing orders, Marks landed his plane in the rough, open sea, folding his own wings on impact. He taxied, picking up survivors, tying the rest to the wings of his plane. Vance and Maxwell were among the last pulled from the water by the USS Cecil J. Doyle, which arrived shortly after midnight on August 3rd. As Vance was hoisted onto the deck of the rescue ship, the world tilting back into a semblance of normalcy, he looked at the ocean. He didn't see the sharks anymore. He saw the black void of abandonment. They had been lost, not to the Japanese, but to the silence of their own navy. Of the 1,196 men who sailed on the Indianapolis, only 316 survived the ordeal. The official failure to notice the Indy was missing until the survivors were spotted was a devastating betrayal. Captain Charles McVay III, the ship's commander, became the scapegoat, unjustly court-martialed for hazarding his ship by failing to zigzag. The Japanese submarine commander who sank the Indy testified that zigzagging would have made no difference. McVay later took his own life, a victim of the same institutional negligence that had cost hundreds of lives. Years later, Peter Maxwell, a successful civil engineer, stood on the white porch of his own home, watching the sunset. He still saw the blue of the Pacific every time the sun hit the horizon. He called Elias Vance, now a retired admiral. "Admiral," Maxwell said, his voice now strong and clear. "I saw a documentary on the Indy today. They focused on the sharks." Vance's voice, old but steady, came through the phone. They always focus on the sharks, Max, because it's easier. It's a monster they can understand. What was the real monster, sir? There was a long silence on the line. The real monster, Vance finally said, was the silence. The silence of the radio, the silence of the sea, and the silence of the system that didn't miss us for 4 whole days. And the survival? The survival wasn't the men who didn't get eaten by the sharks, Max. The survival was the men who didn't let the madness make them drink the water. The survival was sharing 1 cracker in 1,000 square miles of ocean. The survival was giving a damn about the man next to you when every instinct told you to save only yourself. That day, the men of the Indianapolis survived the sharks, the dehydration, and the fire. But the survival story that should never be forgotten is the battle against the madness, and the ultimate truth about human nature. That even in the most absolute darkness, the smallest glimmer of hope, a white torch, a small cracker, is enough to hold the line against oblivion. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story to honor the men of the USS Indianapolis.